My name is Ethan Calloway, and for 2 years I've been visiting a stranger wearing my wife's face. My wife, Claire, was admitted to Hargrove Residential, a private psychiatric facility outside of Portland 26 months ago. Her family said she had a breakdown. Severe depressive episode, they called it. Triggered by the miscarriage we suffered in the spring of 2022. They said she needed professional care, round-the-clock monitoring, a controlled environment. They said I wouldn't understand the depth of what she was going through because I wasn't equipped to handle it. Her father, Richard Holloway, said that last part directly to my face, standing in the hallway of the hospital where Claire had first been admitted, his hand already resting on a lawyer's briefcase. I signed the voluntary commitment paperwork because Claire nodded when they asked her if she wanted to go. That nod. 2 years later, I still see it when I close my eyes at night. Her chin dropping slightly, her eyes unfocused, her hands limp in her lap. I told myself it was grief. I told myself she needed this. I visited every Tuesday and Saturday, the 2 days Hargrove allowed family contact. Each time, Claire sat across from me in a beige chair by the window, wearing soft clothes I didn't recognize, her hair brushed but flat. She would look at me. Sometimes she'd almost smile. But she never really spoke. The doctors told me that was normal for her condition. That recovery was nonlinear. That my presence was helpful even if she couldn't show it. I believed them because I needed to believe something. Then, about 3 months ago, something small changed. And small changes, I've learned, are the ones that rearrange everything. I arrived for my Tuesday visit and the receptionist at Hargrove told me Claire had been moved to a different wing. Routine reclassification, she said, nothing to be concerned about. But when I reached the new visiting room, I passed an open door in the corridor. Claire's old room, door ajar, the cleaning crew inside. And on the windowsill, wedged between the frame and the glass where it must have slipped down and been forgotten, was a folded piece of paper. I didn't take it right away. I walked to the visiting room, sat across from Claire, held her hands, talked to her about the garden I'd been trying to keep up at the house, the one she planted the year we got married. Lavender along the fence. Tomatoes she never got around to staking. I talked until the 30 minutes were up. Then, on my way out, the cleaning crew had moved to the bathroom. The corridor was empty. I took the paper. I waited until I was in my car, 2 blocks away, engine running. Then I unfolded it. It was Claire's handwriting. Shaky, compressed, like she'd been writing fast or writing scared. But unmistakably hers, the looped L's, the way she always printed her E's like little backward 3s. It said, "They're changing my dosage when you're not here. I'm not what they told you I am. Don't trust the reports. Please?" My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the paper on the passenger seat and breathe for a full minute before I could read it again. I drove home. I made coffee I didn't drink. I sat at the kitchen table until midnight, turning that piece of paper over and over in my hands, trying to find an explanation that didn't terrify me. Maybe she wrote it during a psychotic episode. Maybe it was paranoia, a symptom of whatever she was actually suffering from. The doctors had warned me that patients sometimes develop distrust of their caregivers. It was part of the illness, they said. But Claire's handwriting didn't look psychotic. It looked precise. It looked like someone who knew exactly what she was writing and exactly how little time she had to write it. I went back to Hargrove the next day, a Wednesday, not a visit day. I asked to speak with her primary psychiatrist, a Dr. Fenwick. His receptionist told me he was unavailable and offered to schedule an appointment for the following week. I asked about Claire's current medication protocol. The receptionist told me that information was covered under the facility's privacy policy and would need to go through proper channels. I asked which channels. She handed me a form. I filled out the form. I submitted it. I received an automated email confirmation saying my request would be processed within 10 to 15 business days. I drove home and called my older brother, Marcus, who works in pharmaceutical compliance in Seattle. I told him what the note said. I told him about the dosage changes Claire mentioned. I asked him if it was even possible could a facility be medicating a patient beyond what was being documented. He was quiet for a long time. "Ethan," he said carefully, "it's not common. But it's not impossible. If someone with authority over her care had a reason to keep her in a particular state, and if the oversight wasn't being properly enforced." "What kind of reason?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "What's the situation with her trust?" I hadn't thought about the trust in months. When Richard Holloway established it, Claire had been 23 and newly graduated from Oregon State. It was a family holding shares in Holloway Development Group, commercial real estate up and down the Pacific Northwest. Claire's portion of the trust was substantial, but access was gated. The original structure required that Claire either reach the age of 35 or receive formal approval from the family board of trustees to access her full stake independently. Claire turned 34, the year she was admitted. I called our family lawyer the next morning. I asked a single question: what happens to Claire's trust interest if she's been declared medically incapacitated? The answer was, in the documents we'd never scrutinized closely enough. Under the terms of the Calloway Family Trust, in the event of incapacitation of a beneficiary, that beneficiary's voting interest and financial control transferred temporarily to the appointed family guardian. The appointed guardian for Claire, as of her admission to Hargrove, was her older brother, Derek Calloway. Derek, who managed the West Coast portfolio for Calloway Development. Derek, who had always looked at me like I was a problem he hadn't found a solution to yet. Derek, who shook my hand at our wedding with a smile that never reached his eyes and said, "Take good care of her," in a tone that sounded more like a warning than a wish. I went back and looked at our finances from the year before Claire was admitted. Something I'd been too grief-stricken to examine carefully at the time. The miscarriage had been devastating. I wasn't looking for inconsistencies in paperwork. But looking now, I saw that 2 months before Claire's hospitalization, she had filed an independent financial review petition with the Trust's administrative board. She had been moving to claim her shares early. The petition had been denied. 3 weeks after the denial, she had her so-called breakdown. I needed more than suspicion. I needed to understand exactly what was happening to Claire inside that facility. I called a private investigator. Her name was Sonia Reeves, and she'd been recommended by a colleague at work who'd used her during a corporate dispute. I told Sonia I needed 2 things: a full background check on Dr. Fenwick, and any documentation I could obtain legally regarding Claire's actual medication records from Hargrove. While Sonia worked, I did something I hadn't done since Claire was admitted. I called her mother. Patricia Calloway lived separately from Richard now, quietly, in a condo in Eugene. She and Claire had been close before all of this. I hadn't spoken to her because Richard had made it clear, in the early months, that contact with Claire's family was to go through him. Like I was a visitor needing to be managed. Patricia answered on the second ring. When I told her why I was calling, she went very quiet. "Ethan," she said finally, "I haven't been allowed to visit Claire in 8 months. Richard told me the doctor said family contact was disrupting her progress." She paused. I didn't know who to talk to. 8 months. They had cut off her own mother. 2 weeks after I hired Sonia, she called me on a Thursday evening. "Your instinct was right," she said. "Dr. Fenwick has a clean license currently, but he had a malpractice settlement in 2019, sealed. The plaintiff was a patient whose family alleged improper sedation and prolonged unnecessary hospitalization. The case was settled out of court for an amount I can't confirm, but the attorney who handled it is on retainer for Calloway Development Group." I sat down on the stairs. My legs just stopped holding me. "There's more," Sonia said. "I have a source inside Hargrove, a former night shift nurse who left last year. She says that a small number of patients in the East Wing where Claire is receive what the staff quietly calls a family supplement. Dosage adjustments requested not by the attending physician but by whoever is listed as the financial guarantor of the patient's stay." "Who's listed as the financial guarantor for Claire's account?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Derek Calloway," she said. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark in our living room, surrounded by the life Claire and I had built, the photographs and the furniture and the books she'd dog-eared and left stacked on the coffee table like she was coming back any day now. I thought about how many Tuesday and Saturday visits I'd sat across from her and told myself she just needed more time. I thought about the nod she gave when they asked if she wanted to go. I thought about what it must feel like to be aware fully, terrifyingly aware inside a body that won't respond the way you want it to, in a room you can't leave, waiting for the one person you trust to finally see what's happening. I whispered to the empty room, "I see it now. I'm going to get you out." The next morning, I called the best medical malpractice attorney in Portland. Within 48 hours, we had filed an emergency petition for independent psychiatric evaluation, meaning a court-appointed psychiatrist with no connection to Hargrove or the Calloway family would assess Claire's actual condition. Richard's attorney tried to block it. The judge denied the motion to block within 6 hours, calling it, and I am quoting directly from the ruling, "an extraordinary attempt to obstruct a legitimate welfare inquiry." The independent evaluation was scheduled for the following Monday. I wasn't allowed to be present. But Patricia was. Because she had filed as a supporting family petitioner alongside me. She called me the moment she walked out of the building. She knew my name, Patricia said, and she was crying. She said my name, Ethan. She asked where you were. The evaluating psychiatrist report came back in 72 hours. The clinical language was careful and measured, the way medical documents always are, but the conclusion was not ambiguous. Claire Calloway did not meet the diagnostic criteria for the level of care she was receiving. She had been maintained on a combination of sedatives and mood-stabilizing medications at dosages inconsistent with her documented diagnosis. In the evaluating psychiatrist's professional opinion, the medications had been suppressing cognitive function and emotional responsiveness beyond any therapeutic necessity. Claire hadn't been recovering. She'd been being kept still. I drove to Hargrove the day after the report was filed with the court. I didn't have an appointment. I walked through the front entrance and asked to see my wife, and this time, I had a court order that said they had to let me. They brought me to a different room than usual, smaller, with actual sunlight coming through the window. And when Claire walked in, something in her face was different. Her eyes were tracking. Her posture was upright. She was wearing her own clothes, a blue sweater I recognized from years ago, and her hair was pulled back in the way she always wore it when she meant business. She sat down across from me and looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "You found the note." I nodded. I couldn't speak. "I wrote 4 of them," she said. "I didn't know if any of them would reach you. I hid them in different places." I waited. She looked down at her hands. "I was starting to wonder if I'd imagined you." I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. They were cold. She gripped back hard. "What happened?" I asked. "Tell me everything." She told me. The miscarriage had been real. The grief had been real. But the breakdown, the one that had put her in this room, had been orchestrated. Derek had come to visit her 2 days after she left the hospital, while she was still raw and exhausted, and he had told her that he and their father were concerned she wasn't stable enough to manage her share of the trust. That if she tried to claim it in her current state, the board would reject her and it would set back her case by years. He told her the best thing, the protective thing, was to take a short rest. Sign some papers. Let him handle the trust temporarily while she recovered. She had signed. Because he was her brother. Because she was exhausted and hollow from losing the baby and she didn't have the energy to fight. But the short rest had turned into a month, and then 2 months, and by the time she understood what she had actually agreed to, the medications they were giving her had begun to dull everything down. She said it was like thinking through wet cotton. She could feel herself, she was in there but getting words out, reacting the way she wanted to, fighting back. All of it was like trying to move through deep water. "I was conscious the whole time," she said quietly. "Every visit. Every conversation with the doctors. I was there. I just couldn't make my face show it the way I wanted to. The dosages kept making me slower." She looked at me. "I heard everything you said to me. Every Tuesday. Every Saturday. The lavender. The tomatoes." She exhaled, and it came out almost like a laugh. "You kept killing the tomatoes and blaming the soil." I choked on something between a laugh and a sob. "The soil is terrible," I managed. She smiled. And it was hers, fully hers, for the first time in over 2 years. But then her face shifted. She hadn't finished. "Derek wasn't working alone," she said. I stilled. She told me that 6 weeks ago, when the dosages had been slightly reduced after a routine administrative audit flagged an anomaly, she had overheard a phone call. Dr. Fenwick, outside her door, speaking in a low voice. The call was short. The last thing she heard before it ended was Fenwick saying, "She's still compliant. We can push the review back another quarter." The person he was reporting to wasn't Derek. Derek was the one managing the finances, the one whose name was on the guarantor forms. But the person who had built the arrangement, who had been the architect of what Hargrove was doing, that was her father, Richard Holloway, who had watched me sign those commitment papers with his hand on his lawyer's briefcase and said nothing. I had everything recorded. Sonia's documentation. The independent evaluation. Patricia's statement. The financial records linking Derek's guarantor payments to the dosage adjustment timeline. I gave all of it to our attorney. And then I gave a copy to a journalist at the Oregonian who covers corporate accountability stories, along with a detailed account of the Holloway development connection to Fenwick's original 2019 malpractice case. The story ran on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, the Oregon Medical Board had opened a formal investigation into Dr. Fenwick. By Friday, Derek had retained a criminal defense attorney. By the following Monday, Richard Holloway had resigned as chairman of Holloway Development Group, citing, and this is the word his PR team chose, which I will never stop finding, remarkable personal circumstances. Criminal charges. For both of them came 3 weeks later. Medical fraud, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, conspiracy. The district attorney's office described the case in their press release as one of the most deliberate and sustained abuses of a family member's medical situation we have seen in this jurisdiction. Claire was discharged from Hargrove on a Wednesday. I drove there alone, the way I had driven there for 2 years, and I waited in the parking lot the way I always had. Except this time she walked out the front door under her own power, carrying a single bag, wearing her blue sweater, squinting a little at the brightness of the October sky. She stood there for a moment, just breathing. I got out of the car. She turned when she heard the door, and she walked toward me, and when she reached me she put her arms around my neck and held on for a long time without saying anything. I held her back. I didn't say anything either. There wasn't anything to say that would have been large enough for that moment. We drove home in near silence, the windows cracked, the radio on low. She watched the trees go past. At one point she put her hand on my arm, just resting it there, and left it. When we pulled into the driveway, she sat looking at the house for a moment. Then she looked at the garden overgrown, neglected, the lavender gone scraggly along the fence and the tomato cages rusting at a tilt. "It's a mess," she said. "It's been waiting for you," I said. She got out of the car and walked straight to the garden and crouched down beside the lavender and pressed her hand flat against the soil, feeling it. I stood at the edge of the driveway and watched her. Recovery has not been simple or clean. There were weeks when the medication withdrawal made everything hard. There were nights when she'd sit up and just stare at the wall, and I wouldn't know whether to stay close or give her space, so I'd make tea and sit nearby and wait for a signal. There were sessions with a therapist she chose herself, not one recommended by anyone connected to her family, where she worked through things I wasn't in the room for and didn't need to be. There were also days when she'd be in the kitchen before I woke up, already making coffee, hair up, listening to the news, absolutely herself in a way that still catches me off guard each time. Like I have to keep reminding my nervous system that she's here now. That the chair across from me at the table is occupied. That when I come home and call her name, she answers. The trust situation took months to unwind legally, but it resolved in Claire's favor. She holds her shares independently now. She's been quietly involved in restructuring the Calloway Development Group's board, which without Richard or Derek at the helm has been more amenable to change than anyone anticipated. Patricia visits on Sunday afternoons sometimes. She and Claire sit on the back porch and talk for hours, and I give them their space, and occasionally one of them calls me out to settle some argument about a movie or a recipe, and I come out pretending to be reluctant. And it feels, those afternoons, like something that was broken has found a way to be whole again. Not the same shape it was, but solid, real. There's one thing that still sits with me, that I turn over sometimes in quiet moments. About a week after Claire came home, we were lying in bed in the dark, not asleep, both just staring at the ceiling the way people do when there's too much to process to organize into thoughts. And she said, out of nowhere, I kept thinking, when the notes kept not working, I kept thinking maybe you were part of it. Maybe they'd told you and you'd agreed. Maybe that's why you never pushed harder. I didn't say anything immediately, because she deserved me to sit with that rather than rush to defend myself. I understand why you thought that, I finally said. I know you do, she said. That's why I kept writing the notes anyway. Because the other possibility that you just didn't know was the only version of things I could live with in there. I reached over in the dark and found her hand. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, I said. She squeezed my hand once. You found the note, she said. That's enough. We've stopped keeping score of who let whom down and how badly. That kind of accounting doesn't leave room for anything else to grow. What happened to Claire was real, and the people responsible for it will answer for it in court over the next 2 to 3 years, and that process will run its course with or without our constant attention. We testified. We documented. We handed it to people whose job it is to carry it forward. And then we came home. There are tomatoes in the garden again this year. Claire staked them properly this time, 4-foot cages, tied with soft twine, positioned where they'll get the most afternoon sun. She stood back and looked at them one evening after she'd finished, arms crossed, with the particular satisfied expression she gets when something is exactly where it should be. Those are going to make it, she said. I stood beside her and looked at the cages, green and upright in the last of the evening light. Yeah, I said. I think they are.